Hello, my name is Mimi Graney, and I'm the downtown coordinator. I work out of the planning department here in Chelsea City Hall, and I run the program called Chelsea Prospers, which is a program to do economic development in the downtown. So that means supporting the small businesses and making the downtown a great place to come to shop and to gather with friends and neighbors. So a very exciting program is now entering into a whole new phase, and we're looking for your help. For the last 2 years, we've been working at developing a signage program and a facade improvement program for the downtown. And the ultimate goal is to just make the businesses more prosperous and the neighborhood to improve its look and feel and be much more attractive by improving the facades, basically the signage, the sort of look of the windows, look of the businesses, basically from like the ground level that's there. So you probably know in the downtown, there's a lot of storefronts along the businesses on the ground level and then housing up above. Some places in the downtown, there's offices on the second floor, and we're looking to support all the different businesses that are downtown. So through this facade program, we're looking at giving the businesses grants to be able to improve the look of the sort of public-facing part of the business. So new signage, new lighting, removing some of the old security grates, repainting, just really kind of giving it all a great facelift. And we're also looking at how to extend sort of the businesses out into the public way a little bit with things for outdoor dining and cafes. So I'm going to walk you through a slideshow that's going to show you a little bit about how the program, how we got to this place, and some of the ways that we're hoping to be able to enact the improvements. But I want you to put a date into your calendar right now, which is Monday, May 6th. Monday, May 6th. At 7 o'clock, the City Council will be having a public hearing about all the ordinances that I'll be talking about, the ordinances that will enable some of these improvements to happen. So really hoping that the public can come out and make your voice heard. The City Council doesn't know that anybody is interested in this. Basically, that you, as the downtown businesses, the residents, are eager for this unless they hear from you. So really hoping you can come out to that hearing on Monday, May 6th at 7 o'clock at the City Hall City Council chambers on the 3rd floor. And if you can't make it to that meeting, if you could send them an email, pick up the phone and call your city councilor, send them a letter, some way of letting them know what your thoughts are on this. It would be a great help for them to hear from you. So we're going to walk through the slides. So this latest part is basically part of a multi-phase process. We started off basically looking at the design of the downtown, and we went and looked at each of the different facades that were already in the downtown, gave them each a grade, and then sort of looked at sort of best practices of how to make an attractive downtown and an attractive business, the look of those particular businesses. And we created design guidelines. And they're exactly that, just guidelines, not really telling businesses what they have to do, but sort of what are the best practices. So best practices in design is really about having the appropriate size and letter and thinking about the message of your business in all those different details. So there's a whole suite of different signs that businesses might want to do. We're looking at things like historic elements, that sort of thing. So we drafted some design guidelines, and then we actually went and tested those guidelines working with individual businesses in the downtown. So I had a student work with me who is a recent graduate, an architect, and she met with about 15 different businesses and sat down with them and sort of looked at those guidelines, how that might be implemented in their facade, taking into account the type of business it was, the business owner's culture, the downtown's needs, and created sort of a portfolio of what these might look like. And we also looked at, well, what would it cost to make those improvements happen? And with all that kind of information, then we went and drafted ordinances, so specific rules that would facilitate these types of improvements. And a little bit about why we did this was the current city rules are very restrictive in terms of what kind of things businesses can do to promote themselves and what they can look like on the outside. So right now, the regulations say businesses can have one sign and one sign only. And it really just means that just the sign band, that's the space right over the kind of main entrance of the business, that kind of often, if you think of a traditional storefront, it just has that band over the main window and door. It allows just that one sign. So if the business technically if it wants to do a sandwich board, if they want to do a sign in the window saying we're having a sale on Tuesday, if you want to put out a message about what your specials are, if you want to do your business hours, all of those things actually technically aren't allowed by the regulations. If you wanted to have awnings that would cut down and have your name or your logo on it, that wouldn't be allowed. If you wanted to do little decals that maybe were attractive and might say, for like a clothing boutique, that might say shoes, dresses, that wouldn't be allowed. So we're sort of looking at, well, what is, a lot of the businesses could do that, and it would be a way of actually beautifying the facade and communicating what's inside the business in an attractive way. But we also wanted to create some guidelines so it wouldn't be the types of things that folks say are less attractive and actually don't benefit the district. So things like the big decals that are completely covering over the windows, the businesses that have windows that are all darkened so much that you can't see in and can't even know whether the business is open or closed. People are always attracted to other people. So if you're walking down Broadway and if you can see like, oh, look at those people are eating those delicious tacos inside, or like, oh, look at, there's a beautiful dress for sale, that'll draw you in to go and to shop there. So we're looking at how to support the businesses through that design and what that looks like. So we've drafted these ordinances that look at the signage and also to facilitate outdoor dining. And those went to the city council, and we got a bunch of input from before that, input from different business owners to sort of nuance that a little bit. It went to the city council, they sent it to the planning board. The planning board unanimously approved those ordinances, and now it's going back to the city council for them to take the various input, including your participation at the public hearing on May 6th, and then they'll vote on the ordinances. And then for implementation, what we're going to be doing is once these ordinances pass, crossing our fingers, we're then going to be rolling out grants that are going to go to the businesses to help them actually follow through on those recommendations. And one of the things that I've been really impressed by is part of the sort of design process is for how affordably a lot of businesses can be able to follow through on these. But let me move along and actually kind of set where we're at in terms of this timeline. So we started spring 2018 where we designed the guidelines, so that was last year. And then last summer, my intern went out and worked with individual businesses. All last fall, we were drafting those ordinances, being really thoughtful, looking at best practices from other communities, understanding what the interests were for here in Chelsea, where we've got great historic elements. We crafted those ordinances. Then we've been through this winter, have been going through the public process, and we're now at the very last stage where it's most likely going to come for a vote here on May 7th. And then we're hoping once that goes through that I can roll out the grant program this summer, and actually the businesses can actually start installing and fabricating and installing these signs this summer and into the fall. And so basically by Halloween, we should have a number of businesses with a new facelift. So kind of walking through that first step about the design guidelines, on this slide it sort of shows you what all of the individual categories are in the design guidelines. So we looked at transparency, that was the first one, and that really is about, as I mentioned, those windows, having them more able to see through, so big windows that aren't covered with decals, that aren't shaded. Signage, and we broke that, a big section of the design guidelines have got aspects of all the different types of signs, how they can work together. We talked about the upper floor windows, so if there's businesses in those upper windows, how could they have signage, and also whether it's commercial or residential, how to treat those. So you might see some businesses or properties in the downtown, they've actually bricked over those windows, and we're encouraging to maintain the kind of original design of the properties. And if they had much bigger openings, to kind of keep the big windows, don't put a small window in a big opening and try to brick around it. We talked about security, and there's a number of new security aspects other than those big metal grates that can be pulled down at night that can accomplish the same goals for the businesses without having the big metal grates that make it feel kind of, in some ways it actually makes the neighborhood feel more dangerous than it's actually a relatively safe neighborhood to be in. Lighting, we detail both some recommendations for lighting just inside the stores, so that would set off their displays, but also how to effectively light their signage in a great way that's really attractive and affordable, and looked at a bunch of different aspects related to that of how to do it in an environmentally friendly way. Accessibility, that's everything from how to make it easier for people with all kinds of different ability issues. So maybe folks who have got low vision or handicapped mobility issues, of how to be able to make those facades more welcoming to everyone. Historic elements. Chelsea's lucky enough to have a downtown that got built literally in the heyday of downtowns back in the turn of the 20th century. And how can we preserve some of those elements that really have got very classic design that really speaks to when Chelsea was at the height of its center as a shopping district. And then public realm, by that we mean all the spaces where just anybody walking down the street or anyone in the public is welcome to be. So the streets, the sidewalks, the parks, the alleyways, those sometimes businesses are, there's ways to facilitate for businesses to kind of take, not quite, you could call it a sense of ownership, but you could also sort of say stewardship. So things like sidewalk planters, fixing over, putting little window boxes that actually edge into the public realm, but improve it dramatically, and sort of looking at both how can the businesses do stewardship for that, but then also as part of our designs that we're looking overall for reimagining Broadway, our work there that we can make it a more welcoming neighborhood. So I'm going to jump in a little bit to this next slide about the principles that we're looking at working on. So again, as I mentioned, for those design guidelines, we really weren't being super prescriptive, but we were sort of looking at what are the values that we're looking to bring to it. And through those design guidelines, where we would often say the words suggested, encouraged, preferred, we're really not being super dictatorial, both in the guidelines and in the ordinances, but trying to edge people a little bit to think a little bit about the long term of their business and how to bring quality to what they do and things that are a little more durable. So we asked them to look at quality materials, quality design, things that are going to stand the test of time. We're encouraging folks to put personality into their business. So not just, take a sign off the shelf and say, like, I'll have the same sign as everybody else has got. Really, like, if your business, focuses on, jeans from Nicaragua, like, we want you to be able to have a sign that sort of gives us a flavor of Nicaragua or gives a flavor of the particular food that you've got. We want you, both the business owner and the business itself, to be able to express themselves creatively through the signs. As I mentioned before about maintain the historic character. We want it to be, all the signs to be super clear and legible, so folks who maybe English isn't their first language or Spanish isn't their first language, that they're still able to kind of get a sense of what is for sale at your business, and so that we can make the neighborhood more welcoming to everybody. We want to activate the sidewalks so that folks will be walking up and down Broadway and coming to visit the businesses. And ultimately, we want to, through the guidelines and through the ordinances, to make it easier to understand, so that anybody who's opening up a business in the neighborhood understands what kind of signage is available to them, and that we can kind of facilitate that process in a way that's kind of more transparent. So in terms of the ordinances, so these are the rules that are currently before the City Council that they'll be voting on May 6th. They're looking for your feedback at 7 o'clock on Monday, May 6th. What we did was we looked at each of these different types of signage, and we broke it into different categories. So each sign type was broken into what's the definition, what kind of size and proportion do we recommend, what kind of materials and techniques do we recommend, some suggested ways of lighting such a sign, and our recommendations about how to maintain it. So moving on to the next slide, you can actually see in the design guidelines, we tried to make it as graphic as possible. So we're not expecting everybody to be an architect or a designer, but we sort of presented this information in with lots of illustrations, so you can see when we say sign band, you can see on the design guidelines, like right where a sign band on the facade of the building would be. We sort of broke it into the different types. So I'll kind of, on this slide, kind of take you through each of them. So we looked at upper story signage. So that's the the one that would be kind of over the second floor windows or anything kind of above the kind of traditional first floor. We looked at the building name and address because oftentimes that can be overlooked, especially for residential versus commercial properties. How might you treat that in different ways? The sign band, I mentioned that's the one that goes across the kind of business name and main sign, or their main windows and the entrance. Awnings and signs as signs. So sometimes businesses have to choose, do you want to have an awning that provides some shade into your business, or to be able to have a sign that's overhead and be able to show, and we're sort of gave some examples of how to incorporate some of the shade that some of the businesses that are on the shady side of the street might need through an awning, and how to still use that as signage. A big change that is kind of a new one is a projecting sign. So those are signs, if you can sort of imagine that the front of the business would be along Broadway, this would allow it to cut out, kind of jut out over the public right-of-way. There's a number of historic signs like that already in downtown Chelsea, but under the new rules, those aren't permitted, and that means that the businesses can't actually maintain those signs or upgrade them because they're no longer permitted. So we're wanting to create some new rules to be able to allow those to happen. Our other reason for really wanting to encourage the new rules that would allow projecting signs, you probably notice if you're walking down Broadway, the sign band, because the first floors have such high ceilings, the sign band is really high up. And when you've got really nice shady trees, that means you can't actually see the name of the business when you're right in front of it. A projecting sign would allow you to walk down Broadway and you'd see little cues about all the businesses. And you can say like, oh, that boutique that I want to go see is just a couple more steps down, and you don't have to keep kind of stepping out and trying to struggle to find it. Window and door graphics is another one that we're looking at doing. So that's to not encourage the kind of big giant stickers that cover the entire business, but how to limit it in a way that kind of creates some visual cues so that businesses that still have a traditional sign band that may be closer to eye level, you can still get some cues about what's in the business. So it might have, sort of say tacos, pupusas, horchata, and that even if you don't know that the name of the business is La Chula, you'll still have a couple of decals that'll cue you in about what business it is. And then a sidewalk sign, sometimes people call them sandwich boards. Those are the little, sometimes they're plastic, sometimes they're wood, sometimes they're metal. It's a little tent-shaped sign that would sit out on the sidewalk. Currently, those aren't allowed in the downtown. You probably see them occasionally, and the businesses can technically get fined for having those. We're sort of looking at how to be able to facilitate businesses to do that in a way that is within the city's regulations and guidelines, and are done in an orderly way that's safe for everybody. So on the next slide, I'm going to start walking you through some of the ways in which we looked at these design guidelines and what these ordinances, if we were to pass them, how they might actually get implemented in the downtown. And these are some of these examples of that student or a recent graduate who had worked with me, Natalia Hermida. Last summer, she met with individual business owners and basically collaboratively worked with them and sort of looked at what their new facade could look like. So in this example, you can see Dr. Deborah Wayne and Associates. Her business is right on Broadway, and she's an optometrist. She does eye exams and does eyeglasses. And her property is just a sort of simple two-story building. And you can see on the left, that's what the existing facade looks like. And you can see she's got an awning that the little bottom edge of the awning has got her name on it. That means when she opens up the awning, it's actually hard to see what the name of her business is, and you have to actually step into the street to see it. And those little signs that are in her windows technically aren't allowed, and we're sort of looking at how to facilitate that. And it's kind of in some poor shape that her entrance isn't lit, so sometimes folks can kind of gather in there and be smoking and things that she's not necessarily wanting to happen right at her front door. So on the mock-up that Natalia did, you can see that she used the sign band and put Dr. Deborah Wayne and Associates sign. She kind of recommends that going across the way and then having what's called gooseneck lighting. So it's a light that would come down and shine on her, her name so that it would light up at night. And then she has one of the projecting signs that says optometrist with some, and using like a fun little detail of some curved or carved out eyeglasses that could hang on there. So that means even if you don't know what an optometrist is, as soon as you see those eyeglasses, you'll know like, oh, that's an eye doctor. That's a place I can go for eyeglasses. What's also kind of cool by sort of just saying optometrist and having a very graphic image as the sign band, or as the projecting sign, which is pretty common, is it means that if Dr. Wayne should sell her business to another eye doctor, they don't necessarily need to change that great little element. And so that could be true for if it's a shoe store or if it's for a dentist. If you have sort of a simple projecting sign that will stand the test of time, that even as the business name might change, that those kind of fun sculptural elements could stay in place. So on this next example, you could see Variedades Ada, which is right in Bellingham Square, across from City Hall. Her business, it's a tough one because in some ways it's great that she's shaded with these wonderful street trees, but it means her business is a little hidden. So in this one, Natalia's recommendations were to play on it being a gift shop, and she is recommending this great kind of curved sign that would be carved so it looks as if it's like a gift ribbon, a ribbon that you'd find on a present, and then to have individual letters that would then say party supplies, jewelry, and gifts that would be into the brick. So it's actually taking off those old the grates that are going down over the business that really makes it even darker and opening it up a little bit. There's still other ways of getting security in a space like that. There's this new security film that could go on the windows, so it actually, any passersby wouldn't even recognize it. It's not until somebody tries to smash the glass that they'd recognize that it's more secure. There's also other ways of doing grates that are hidden up underneath the facade so that it doesn't stick out, and that's another much more affordable option. And you can see in the recommendation for this, for the projecting sign, it's a great little carved sign that says gift shop with a little present on it. On the next slide for Tukasa, Natalia was inspired by it being sort of a very welcoming space and having a sense of warmth there. And if you go inside the business, there's an awful lot of wood in it. So she recommended that they use sort of a natural wood for a sign and then do the individual letters on that. And to make it look a little more homey, to do a window box. And then folks know Tukasa, meaning your house, doing a projecting sign that just looks like a little house there that in a more subtle way communicates which business is there. On this next one for Goldmine, this is one that's maybe the most dramatic of the transformations. This is a kind of major corner business. And this is another one that actually demonstrates one of the challenges that the current rules have for businesses. So even though Goldmine is actually on a corner, they're really only, because it's still the existing rule is one sign, one business. Goldmine, even though they have two different entrances, and you could, if you're walking down the street, if you're going down Broadway or you're coming up Everett, you kind of want to have the name of the business on the entrance that you're entering. The new rules recommend that businesses can do a identifying sign on each street frontage that they're on. You can see sort of in her recommendation is taking down the old sort of shingles that are there, doing individual canvas awnings for each window that really highlights that architectural element. Doing some planters, so again, going back to that sense of the public realm. Technically, the business ends right on that street edge, and we're recommending that they be permitted to do planters that are out that way that really both create sort of some color, but also highlight those two different entrances to come in. And it's a little hard to see in the slide maybe, but one of their, the Goldmine's logo is like a diamond shape, and she recommended kind of echoing that diamond shape on each of the awnings to sort of bring it home in kind of a artistic way. Another example that we looked at was El Corral. And that's one of those businesses, as I mentioned, has these historic signs that extend, blade signs that extends out over the public right-of-way. She was recommending, you could probably see that it's from an old Chinese restaurant, Wings from many years ago, and it's an old vintage sign. instead of just removing it, she was sort of looking at that and saying, oh, it kind of looks a little bit like a cactus. What if we played on the kind of Western theme and made the old neon sign look like a cactus, and then playing with this wagon wheel element and playing up the sort of Western kind of cowboy theme for that one. On this next side, La Princesita. This is like while this business isn't on Broadway, it's a kind of very prominent one in the downtown, because as you're navigating through by car, it's one that you really is a great presence on that street corner. Natalia felt like this one sort of evoked a little bit like a castle. So she was sort of looking at how, with a sign band that went across all the way around the corner, detailing what the business, what things you'll find on the inside, and highlighting all of the great little windows there with individual awnings. So that's that for the signage ordinances. So hoping you can come to this public hearing on May, the first Monday in May, to communicate to the business owner or to the City Council about what you think about these proposed signage ordinances. The other element that's included here actually looks at sidewalk dining. And around sidewalk dining, you maybe see it in other business districts where businesses are allowed to have some chairs right in front of the business, sort of whatever kind of part of the sidewalk is kind of right in front of theirs, that it would enable them, if there's enough room for people to still get past safely walking down the street. So whether it's somebody in a stroller or in a wheelchair or just walking along, that there's a clear path to be able to get through. But maybe there's some extra spots that would allow for a table or two to be there. We also looked at for businesses that are maybe in an area where there's a very narrow sidewalk, to at least be able to propose and to apply to maybe use the parking spot immediately in front of that business. That could be maybe some outdoor dining set up there, or maybe the business is right on an alleyway, maybe behind the business or to the side, and that could be another spot for some outdoor dining. So in a similar way on how we had approached the signage regulations, looking at what's the definition, where could such a thing happen in terms of the location and the dimensions, what might the design and layout look like, so making sure that it's safely designed so that anybody walking down the sidewalk isn't going to trip. If you're inside the space, that you can move out. What kind of conditions we want to allow this to happen. So what would be the operating hours, what would be the impact on the business's occupancy, for example, and then what would be the permitting process to go through on that. So to give you a sense of what some of the aspects on this wasn't covered in those design guidelines that we created. Those were specifically about the built part of the business. These new ones were kind of recommendations that we were starting kind of fresh over this winter. So in terms of looking at the locations and dimensions for the outdoor dining, in terms of the sites, we were looking at the ordinance are written to allow them on sidewalks, immediately abutting the business that would be operating in that space. In parking spaces, again, immediately abutting the space connected with that business, and in alleyways. So if my business was here and there was, say, if I was running a restaurant and there was a convenience store right next door, I could only operate my outdoor dining right in front of my business. I couldn't take the spots with the convenience store, even though they might not be using them. We're saying it has to kind of stay right next to the business that is associated with. And there's a number of different reasons on that, just in terms of practicality, to be able to keep an eye on that particular business, passersby know which business it's associated with. And that's how we decided what the kind of appropriate size would be. So businesses can't kind of take over, one individual business couldn't take over all of Broadway. It's sort of like if you're renting a storefront of this size, that's kind of your designated spot. And we're requiring as part of these that there be a containment, some way of creating like a little fence or designation that it's clear about when you're inside the sidewalk cafe and when you're outside. And part of that has to do with just so that the business, again, goes back to their sense of stewardship. What happens inside that space, they have to take responsibility for. So if folks are leaving trash behind, the business needs to make sure that that's taken care of. On this next slide, I detail around the design and layout of it. So we talked a little bit about these outdoor cafes. Can't at all restrict people going down the sidewalk or passing through, just going through the rest of the downtown. It needs to comply with all kinds of ADA requirements. We have to make sure there's not tripping hazards, that it's clear to be able to see what's going on inside, and it to be done in an attractive way. We want to make sure that these outdoor cafes aren't impacting ramps and loading zones and parking meters and hydrants and stop signs. So that is going to impact some businesses, might not be able to find a spot right in front of their business where this isn't practical. And we'll try to work with them as much as possible, but we are kind of constrained. There's a lot of things happening in a small amount of space here in Chelsea. We talked a little bit about the equipment that would be permitted, so we recommend that the businesses use matching chairs and tables, that they can use umbrellas, but how to secure them, how do they have to put the equipment away. We really tried to think through as much as possible how this might work. And then the occupancy. For a lot of businesses, they maybe are maxed out in terms of their parking or their occupancy inside the business with the number of seats. And we recognize that most likely these cafes, almost certainly, will only be actively used when it's a beautiful day outside. So we're recognizing that their customers that might otherwise have been inside are choosing to sit outside. So we're saying that the businesses don't need to suddenly build another restroom, for example, to be able to make this happen. We're recognizing that we're kind of still using the shared space rules. In terms of the operations and how the rules under which, the conditions under which the outdoor dining would work, we're saying that the hours for the outdoor dining is going to be tied with a license for that business to operate. So if their open hours are from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., at 6 p.m. their outdoor dining has to close as well. It can only be used for food and beverage service. So it's not for things like doing a sidewalk sale of clothing. It's not for just creating a lounge. It's really about commercial activity in the downtown. And any of the regular safety rules, so for example, you have to wear your shirt and you have to wear shoes while you're eating. You can't bring your pet into the restaurant. Those same rules are going to apply as if the sidewalk cafe is inside the restaurant. And then we want to make sure the businesses are taking good care of this. So we're saying that they can't store all their paper goods out there so that they're not flying around. We want to make sure that their menus aren't flying around, that they're not causing trash and are a benefit to the neighborhood, not a detriment. So I hope this was helpful to kind of understand a little bit about those regulations, what's looking in there. I know sometimes looking at city regulations, we can kind of want to leave that to the lawyers. So I wanted to kind of explain some of this in a more accessible way. If you're interested in ever following what's happening in terms of the work that's happening in Chelsea Prospers, I have an email newsletter, and you're always welcome to send me an email at mgraney@chelseama.gov, and I can add you to the list. Or also you can just go to our Facebook page, which is Chelsea Prospers on Facebook, and there's a link there where you can sign up for the email newsletter. I send it out about once a month, and it has all kinds of links to information about what's happening in the signage program, downtown events, business news, whatever happens in the downtown, I try to capture it in that email newsletter. And in the email newsletters, I have links to both the slideshow and the actual ordinances, and it's also available on the city's website. So again, if you want to have more information about this, let me know. I super encourage you to attend the public hearing. That's on Monday, May 6th at 7 o'clock at the City Hall chambers. The City Council chambers on the third floor of City Hall, to have your voice be heard about how you feel about these ordinances and how you think they could be made better, and your encouragement to the City Council around those. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time to tell you more about all the great downtown events coming up this summer.